guys? Am I coming through? Can you hear me now? All right, good stuff. We're talking upstairs. You guys are doing the exercise about the truth. We're talking a little bit about truth tonight. So if I put this up here, 2 plus 2 equals 5. How many people would agree with that? Sounds good, right? 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, what if 4 wants to not be that way? What if 5 wants to be the answer to 2 plus 2? You know, you'll hurt his feelings. If 5 doesn't get, why does 4 get to have all the fun? Why can't he get the right answer too? You're just being narrow-minded and exclusive. It's not nice. You see, we understand this because math doesn't care about your feelings. 2 plus 2 equals 4. And it will always equal 4. That's truth. That's what we call objective truth. It's an object. It doesn't move and shift around. Subjective is when, well, it's subject to your own opinions and feelings. Math isn't like that. The truth in the Bible isn't like that either. If I were to get up here and say, Jesus never said that everybody had to obey the gospel to be saved. Everybody's going to heaven. That is false. That is not the truth. The truth doesn't care about your feelings either. Even though you might think, well, that's not very nice. The truth is the truth. What I want you guys to do tonight, and what I want to really talk to you about, is I want you to think for yourselves. Don't believe a scientist that stands before you with a white lab coat and says 2 plus 2 equals 5. Don't listen to a preacher that stands before you with a suit jacket and a tie and Bible in his hand and says no one needs to obey the gospel to be saved just because he's a preacher. You need to think for yourself. I want you guys to be questioning things and examining them for yourselves. Jesus never discouraged people asking him questions. He encouraged people to think about things, take it to its logical conclusion. The only time Jesus got frustrated with people when they were asking questions was when they were trying to trap him and when they were stubbornly refusing to believe despite proof that he had offered to them. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 1, John writes, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." John says, don't believe everybody coming along claiming to be a prophet, claiming to have a word from God. Check them out. Make sure what they're saying matches what you've heard God say before. In Acts chapter 17 and verse 11, Paul was talking about a people from an area called Berea. The Bereans, they were called, and Paul said these were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica. Paul, why were they more fair-minded? Well, because they received the word with all readiness, and they searched the scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so. So Paul rolls into town in Berea, and he starts telling them some things that they, being Jews at the time, only knew the Old Testament. He said, now the Old Testament has been fulfilled. We have Christ, the Son of God, who has come, the promised Messiah. And they said, hang on, Paul, this sounds a little different. This doesn't sound like what I remember reading in my Old Testament. Let me go back and check that out. So they flipped back, and they read through it, and they said, okay, what Paul said matches up. That makes sense. We will believe it. Paul said they did this daily to make sure these things were true. Paul didn't say, well, I'm an apostle of Jesus Christ. How dare you question my authority? Just do what I tell you. No. Paul said, you're doing it the right way. In the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 18, there's mention there about prophets that come along. And Moses tells the people, when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. If some guy comes along claiming to be a prophet, have the word of God, and he says, God says this is going to happen soon, and then that comes to pass and it doesn't happen. He's a false prophet. He said he's just proven himself to be false. And there was a severe penalty for people. It involved rocks, a lot of rocks. But even in the Old Testament, God wants his people to be thinkers. He wants you to think for yourself. He wants you to check things out and be sure about them. In the 17th century, a man named Francis Bacon, who just happened to be a Christian, founded something that we know as the scientific method. And he listed out how science comes to determine truth. And it involves things like you form a hypothesis, you have a theory, and then you perform experiments, you perform tests to see if it's true. And then when you're done with all the tests, then you analyze the results and see what you came up with. Well, you guys have studied this in school, in science classes. Scientific methods, how we determine whether something's true or not true, accurate or inaccurate. True science needs to be four things. Not just these four things, but at least these four things. It needs to be testable. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be repeatable. And it needs to be observable. Real science conforms to all of those criteria. If you can't test it, it's just an opinion. If you can't measure it, it's just a guess. If you can't repeat it, then maybe it was just a fluke, an accident, one-time deal. And if you can't observe it, it's just a fairy tale. No way to verify it. True science must be those four things. So we're going to look at science and creation. Not that they are enemies, but we're just going to try to put it into these criteria and see which is more scientific. So let's look first of all at the evidence that some have put forward supporting the theory of evolution. Things like the Big Bang, suggesting that the universe is millions of years old. I think 15 million years old is, or 15 billion years old is the current number. We'll talk about that a little bit later. What are some things that people have said shows that the universe is billions of years old? Well, there's a problem when we start applying these criteria. We start applying the science, we start testing and examining. We see things like comets. Imagine what comets are, right? They're basically ice balls floating around in space. They're big balls of ice and rock, and they float around. And when you see a comet streaking along, you see the tail coming off behind it, the little streaking behind it. What that is it's parts of that comet breaking off, melting, if you will. Because even though it's cold in space, things floating around like that are subject to things like solar wind. The sun puts out energy that will break the comet down. Well, why is that a problem for the Big Bang? Because the Big Bang says that everything was created all at once in a great big explosion, including comets. All the planets, all the stars, everything. So comets were created at the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. Yeah. And they have to be. Then they have to be 15 billion years old at last count. Well, there's a problem with that because for a comet to have lasted just the 4.6 billion years that the Earth is supposed to be in existence, they're estimating the Earth to be 4.6 billion years old right now. For a comet to even last that long, it would have had to begin with a mass of 10 to the 19th power of our sun. Think about how big the sun is in comparison to the Earth. Now just imagine a comet that is 10 times the size of our sun. 10 to the 19th power. Now imagine that comet times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10, times 10. 19 times. That is a big comet, folks. There's no way. It would have been disintegrated long, long ago. Talking about the sun, there's also another problem with the sun. The sun, you may or may not know, is shrinking. Now calm down. It's shrinking at a very, very, very slow rate. But astronomers have measured that the sun is shrinking in its diameter by a measure at a rate of 0.2 seconds of arc per century. What in the world does that mean? I have no idea. But what it means, when you extrapolate all the math out, I was an English major, I wasn't a math major. So I'm just taking their word for it here, but I've checked it out. What that means is that it would have been twice its present size. The sun would have been twice as big as it is right now just 10 million years ago. Based on this rate that it is shrinking. It's burning out. It's a fire and it's dying down. Would have been twice its size 10 million years ago. 100 million years ago, it would have made the Earth's atmosphere far too hot to sustain life. Just 100 million years ago. 200 million years ago, it's growing outward. We're reversing that shrinking. 200 million years ago, it would have been so large that it would have touched the Earth where it sits in space now. Obviously not going to be any life there. That's 200 million years ago. The universe is 15 billion, we're told. The numbers don't add up. Again, math doesn't care about your feelings, whether you agree with it or not. What about human evolution? Now we have lots and lots of ape fossils. We have lots and lots of human fossils. But the question we need to ask is, where are the intermediate forms? If, as many are told, we evolved from an ape-like creature that got steadily, increasingly more advanced and more complex until we finally reached modern human beings, Darwinism, survival of the fittest, natural selection, all of those things working together, what that thrives off of is failure. If you have evolution, what they're saying, well, a random mutation caused this creature to have a slightly different form, and that was a survival benefit, so then it survived better than its contemporaries. You have one success for millions, if not billions, of failures. So if we have apes, and we have human beings, there should be infinitely more failures in the middle that didn't quite make it. So where are they? The earth should be filled with them. They're not. All of those missing link stories that you read about, National Geographic and things like that, Discovery Channel, these ancestors of human beings, supposedly, all of the missing link fossils that we have, you have Sediba, you have Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, and you have Ida, so many that they have found, all of these missing link fossils that are in the news cycle for so long. All of those fossils, if you put them all together, they would all fit in one coffin. Because they found a fingertip, they found a piece of a jawbone, a tooth, they found a kneecap, tiny little bits, and they'll make a whole creature out of this with artist rendering. Lucy, I mentioned Lucy. She's the fossil set here on the right-hand side there. That's what they found of Lucy. Well, after they've examined the bones, even though this was hailed as a missing link, the intermediate, when apes left the trees and started walking on the earth and started on their path to becoming human, they've tried so hard to make it half human, half ape. But when they really examined it by the science, they found that Lucy has a small ape skull. I mean, they only found parts of it, but what they found was identical to ape skulls. The shoulder bones are formed just like ape shoulders are, made for swinging in trees, not for walking around and carrying things. Her wrist bones are locking wrists. They don't move around like this, like human wrists do, so we can grasp and use tools. They're rigid, just like hers. The metacarpals, the bones in the hand here, are curved. They're straight in humans, they're curved in apes. So she has ape hands. The rib bones in animals, and even in apes and chimpanzees, are round, just like Lucy's. Human ribs are flat. And the rib cage itself, in apes, the rib cage is conical, shaped like a cone or a bell. Human beings, it's barrel-shaped, straight side. Lucy has 8 ribs. The pelvis of this fossil is narrow, like an ape's, not wide like a human. The leg bones are bowed, like ape legs, not like humans. The teeth And the jawbone are 8 teeth, 8 jaws. Even the ear bone, they found a little ear bone. And the ear bone was ape-like, not human-like. What about Neanderthals? Everybody's heard of Neanderthal, right? The caveman, you get the idea of the big hairy guy hunched over with the big old brow ridge, looking very primitive and savage. The first Neanderthal fossil was found in 1856 by an anatomist named Rudolf Virchow. He found a skull, and he determined after his examination that it was not a separate species of primitive human. This is the guy that found the first Neanderthal fossil. It was not a primitive human being, but rather it was simply a modern human being that had been afflicted with a condition called rickets, a vitamin D deficiency, and osteoporosis. That's why the bones look the way they do. Not a separate creature, human, with an illness that we see exhibited today. They did a reanalysis of this 100 years later in 1958. They went over this again, and they found the same results. In 1978, a man named Erich Trinkhaus, who was the world's foremost expert on Neanderthals, he concluded, I quote here, "Detailed comparison of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans." He said Neanderthals are not some subhuman, mostly human creature. They are fully human beings, similar in every way to modern man. But that's not what you see in the science magazines and in the movies. They continue to promote this idea of the missing link, of the caveman. So if we're looking at evolution purely by the science, does it meet the criteria of the scientific method? You remember what they were? It needs to be measured, tested, observed, or repeated. Well, I love this slide here. Looking at some kind of a saber-toothed dog fossil or something. 50,000 years old. That's 3.5 million to you and me. It's kind of a play on the old joke about dog years supposedly being, 7 dog years for every 1 human year. But that kind of math, it's just an estimate. And you find this constantly in old Earth ideas. These estimates have changed over time. The universe used to be thought to be about 5 billion years old. And well, we've done some things and we've refigured. Now it's, I think it's about 10 billion years old. Now it's up to 15. Who knows what it'll be tomorrow? As of now, the Earth is supposedly 4.6 billion years old, but that could change. It's changed before. The evolutionary theory is constantly being revised because it is constantly being proven wrong.
Yeah.
And some will say, well, that's good science. You see, we found this new fossil, we found this new evidence, we did this research, and we discovered that we were off, so we're revising the theory. That's good science. No, it's not. It just proves that your starting point was wrong. I mean, yes, we need to learn from our mistakes, of course, but it has to be revised so constantly. It just proves that your starting point was not accurate. So measurement. Not really any way to measure accurately the evolutionary theory. Every test that comes along that is done that seems to disprove evolution, and there are lots and lots of them, every time a test comes along that flies in the face of accepted evolutionary theory, those results are hidden, they're ignored, or they are dismissed as just a fluke, an error, moving a decimal place in the wrong place, a contaminated specimen, or something like that. Well, if a test disproves your theory, then it disproves your theory. Real science must be observable. Evolution wasn't observed. Can't be observed. It's just assumed.
Yeah.
Evolution is not happening today. We don't see it happening today. You may have said, oh, we've got this type of an animal that's evolving into something else. Species will change. They will alter. There will be different forms within a species. You'll have different variations of dogs through breeding and other pressures and factors. But dogs are not slowly turning into cats or people. Change within a species is not evolution. Evolution wasn't observed, can't be observed. The Big Bang cannot be repeated. True science must be repeatable. They can't repeat it. There was some scientists that tried back in the 50s. Stanley Miller and another scientist named Urey. The Miller-Urey experiment, you guys ever read about this in school? They took what they thought at the time was most likely what the Earth's atmosphere was like in the primordial days. You know, they took some nitrogen, some methane, and oxygen, and all this, and they put it into a tube, and they zapped it with electricity, trying to create, you know, life, proteins, basically. And it failed. They couldn't do it. They tried. Lots and lots of time. Couldn't do it. It can't be repeated. So it just has to be assumed, just has to be taken for granted. That's not real science. If evolution is true, I mean, I guess it may be true, it could be possible, but it can't be proven. There's no way to know. Now let's look in contrast at the evidence for a young earth, for creation. Let's just look at a couple of examples here. What about the global flood that we read about in Genesis chapter 7? God cleansed the earth with a flood that lasted for a year. So the waters were rising, the waters were receding for a year. Before Noah and his family came out of the ark with all the animals. So if there was a global flood, like the Bible says, what would we expect to see? We look out in the world, what would we expect to see? We would expect to see canyons that have been carved by violent rushing water currents of the waters rising and receding over a year. And that's what we see. If you ever see a news story about when a levee breaks or a dam breaks or something like that, and you see the water rushing, I mean, it tears stuff up. It sweeps houses away, scours the dirt down to the rock, moves boulders miles downstream. It's powerful. And that's one tiny example, one local example. Imagine what a global flood that lasted a year would do. You see news stories about mudslides and how destructive and damaging they can be. What would it be on a global scale? Something else we would expect to see if there was a global flood is we would expect there to be flat-lined layers of sedimentary rock full of rapidly buried animal fossils. And guess what? That's what we find. Anybody ever been to the Grand Canyon? I went to the Grand Canyon when I was a kid. This picture of the Grand Canyon. You can see all the lines. See how nice and straight and flat? Looks like they were just stacked like cards, doesn't it? They were laid down with water. Something that you see, the reason why it's important that there are flat layers of transition between the two is because there's a lack of erosion. If, as evolutionary scientists say, these layers of sediment built up slowly over millions and billions of years, gradually, if that's what happened, then you've got the top layer, whatever the top layer is at that current moment, is exposed for millions or billions of years to the elements. What's going to happen? What happened? How many of you live on country roads? How many of you guys live on dirt roads? What happened after this last snowstorm? Made your road look like the surface of the moon, right? I drove a school bus down there. It was not fun. That's one little snowstorm. When you get a big spring rain, the roads are terrible. Washes all the dirt away, makes a big mess, right? Again, imagine that on a grander scale. If that's one little rainstorm in one little area on one little dirt road, these massive layers of dirt, when they're being exposed to the elements for millions of years, there's going to be some ruts, some shifting, some holes in it, but they're not. They're all laid down perfectly nice and flat, stacked on top of each other. How can that be? When you see layers of sediment laid down rapidly by water, it looks like this. What about the geologic column? You guys probably studied that in school about what fossils are. And you see the geologic column here, you've got these are the simplest creatures that we find on the bottom. These are 500 million years old. And it's a little bigger marine creatures, and then slightly bigger marine creatures. Then we start getting up into small land creatures, larger land creatures, really large land creatures, and finally, human beings at the very top. Imagine if there was a global flood. The waters are rising, it's raining for 40 days and 40 nights. The dry land is evaporating. What are you going to do? You're going to go to higher ground to get away from the water, right? So the larger, more complex creatures are going to go to higher ground. Human beings, the smartest, most resourceful, are going to be at the higher levels in the geologic column when everything is eventually underwater. And that's what we find. I think one of the most powerful evidences against long ages is polystrate fossils. Polystrate fossils are fossils that go through several layers of this geological column. We have tree trunks. There are tree trunks like these here, and they're all over the world, that go through what evolutionary geologists would say, well, this is, you know, the Jurassic period, the Cretaceous period, the Triassic era. So many millions of years old, fewer millions of years old, all through those layers. How is a tree going to survive being slowly buried for millions and millions and millions of years before it rots away? Well, it won't. But it makes a lot more sense if it was rapidly buried by layers of wet sediment in something like a global flood. They found the skull of an ichthyosaur. Right over here in 1999 in a quarry in Switzerland. They're chipping away the rock and they find this skull. Ichthyosaur, the big sort of swordfish-looking dinosaur. And the funny thing was, it was straight up and down, and the skull was piercing 3, maybe 4 of these different sedimentary layers that would have supposedly been laid down slowly, gradually for millions and millions of years, while this ichthyosaur skull was just patiently waiting all that time. It doesn't make any sense. There was a whale fossil that was found in Lompoc, California in the 70s. And this whale's body went through about 3 different geologic layers. So maybe we need to rethink this whole geologic layer thing, instead of trying to make up some fairy tale of how this could have happened. What about carbon dating? You say, well, carbon dating, tells us that this is so and so old, and that's what the scientists say. Dinosaur fossils often are found containing carbon-14, which should be impossible because even evolutionary scientists will say carbon-14 cannot exist in biological organisms and fossils for any more than a few thousand years. They say certainly no more than 50,000 years at the absolute max. By that time, all that carbon-14 is going to radioactively decay and it's going to turn into another element. It'll be gone. And yet, you find dinosaur bones all the time. 65 million years old, supposedly, that have carbon-14 in it. So that's it. But when scientists are confronted with this evidence, they say, well, that sample must have been contaminated. All of them? Hundreds of them? All the samples can't be contaminated. Maybe we need to reassess the theory instead. But this is just one more example of how the theory must be defended at all costs in spite of the evidence. Radiometric dating methods like carbon-14, potassium argon, all those things are far from accurate. How inaccurate, you ask? They took rock samples from Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, which is an active volcano, still erupting today. It's been erupting for many years. They've taken rock samples from lava flows at Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, and they dated them, according to these radiometric dating methods, at 22 million years old. And yet, local records prove that the rocks that those lava flows, the lava flows that those rocks were taken from, were from an eruption that happened 200 years ago. 22 million versus 200. That's a big margin of error. Geologists have dated rock samples from the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington at 350,000 years old. That eruption happened when I was in 3rd grade. Now, I'm old, but I am not 350,000 years old. So maybe these methods aren't as accurate as we've been led to believe. Again, I want to tell you, true science must be measurable, testable, repeatable, and observable. And when we at biblical creationism, the idea that God created the universe, not billions of years ago, but much more recently, as opposed to a random Big Bang explosion billions and billions of years ago. Biblical creationism is constantly being verified by archaeology, discoveries they make every day, it seems, anthropology, biology, astronomy, history, manuscript evidence, scientific discoveries, all confirm the complexity of life from the very beginning, not a slow march from slime up to modern man. But real scientific results and evidence from the intricacies of life, from the living organism's design, that we are designed. Everything in the universe has been designed by God. Look at this slide here of a cell. Look at all the things going on in here. This is amazing. This is a cell. You've got a nuclear pore complex, transcription site. You've got the chromosomes over here. You've got a transcription site reading the chromosomes, doing all that function. All of these, got a SAM-68 nuclear body here. I have no idea what that is, but man, it sounds complex. Look at all this. You know, hang on a second. You know, I made a mistake. This is not a cell. This is just the nucleus of a cell. Here's a cell. There's the nucleus we're just looking at. As complex as that was, look at all this other stuff going on. Mitochondrion, Golgi complex, flagellum, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes. That's one cell. Look at the mitochondria. It's in a cell over here. The DNA, the way it routes through there, the way this is folded and shaped in a way that functions like a machine, like a supercomputer. Random accident? Not hardly. You see, the best scientific minds of man thought that the sun revolved around the earth until the 16th century. And then astronomers discovered what the Bible knew all along and wrote about thousands of years before. Late to the party, as always. Every scientific discovery demands that evolutionary theory has to be revised and adjusted to fit the new evidence. The creation model, the biblical model, has remained the same since it was written. It doesn't have to change because the evidence supports it. Evolution is a guess because no one was there to observe it. But there were witnesses to God's creation, eyewitnesses, and we have their written testimony. This blows my mind. This is a chart of the lifespan of the people we call the patriarchs. The first people on the earth, from Adam down to Abraham. These lines represent their lifespans. Adam was 930 years old. So if we start at year 0, even if we don't know where that year 0 started, if we start at year 0 and we go to Adam's lifespan, I want you to notice who's still alive when he dies. This is the amazing thing. Look down here, we've got Noah. Remember him? The ark guy, right? Look at Noah. But look at Noah's dad, a man named Lamech. Now, Noah just barely missed Adam, but Noah could have asked his dad. Noah's father could have asked Adam, "Hey, great-great-great-great-great-grandpa Adam, tell me what it was like when God made the universe." And he could have talked to him. That's amazing to me. What about Abraham? Abraham's down here. Notice how also after the flood the lifespans get a lot shorter. Talk about that another time maybe. Abraham. Now again, he just missed Noah. But Abraham could have talked to his son Shem. "Hey, great-great-great-great-great-grandpa Shem, tell me what it was like to be on the ark with all those animals." Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Eyewitness testimony. and it's been written down for us. Last thing here, I'll try to hurry up and I'm going a little long here. Anybody ever heard of something called the Drake equation? If you haven't, look it up. Google it when you get home, the Drake equation. It's really cool. Well, basically what it is it's an equation that was thought up by the scientist named Drake, and he was trying to figure out the parameters of what it would take to have life on Earth. If you take all of the factors for a habitable planet, like planet Earth, all the things that are needed to sustain life. You need water, you need oxygen, you need nitrogen, you need a protective atmosphere that allows, that blocks ultraviolet rays, but not too much. So you need all of these parameters. And not only do you need those parameters, but they also have to be within certain ranges. You have to have just the right amount of water. You have to have oxygen, but not too much oxygen, not too little oxygen. And to get all of these things just right, the Goldilocks principle there, he figured out there was 128 of these. A scientist named Hugh Ross, a creationist, Hugh Ross tried to put this Drake equation to the test, so he did the math. Math doesn't care about your feelings, remember? So he identified these here. He had these 128 factors, and he said for all of these 128 factors to be present on one planet in the universe, the probability of that happening by random chemical accident is less than 1 in 10 to the 144th power. So less than 1 chance in 1,000 trillion, how many times? Trillion, that any such planet exists in the universe. But we do know there is one, because we live on it. So the chances of that happening by random accident are impossible. Numbers like 1 in 10 to the 144th power are beyond our comprehension. I can't imagine that. I doubt you can either. Yep. I mean, we can write the numbers out, we can count the zeros, it really doesn't mean that much. So we need an illustration to see what the chances are and try to understand these a little better. So I'm going to try to put this into an illustrative form for you to understand just how random the chances of having life evolve on Earth all by itself are. Imagine the total land surface of the entire United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. Add all of that together, and you have a total of 3.5 million square miles. Okay? The surface area of the United States, 3.5 million square miles. Now imagine a silver dollar. Silver dollar is about 1 square inch. So then imagine covering all of the land surface in the United States, 3.5 million square miles with silver dollars. You're thinking, hey, it's cha-ching, that's a lot of money. We're going to cover the entire surface area of the United States with silver dollars, okay? And then we're going to start adding new layers to the silver dollars. We're going to add another layer of silver dollars all across 3.5 million square miles. We're going to add another layer and another layer. How thick is about 1/8 of an inch silver dollar? Layer after layer after layer after layer. And we're going to keep on adding layers to the entire surface of the United States until it is at a height of 10 miles. You look up in the air and you see the little white streak with the little dot at the end of it is the airplane. They're flying about 6 miles in the air. It's almost twice that high. The whole surface area of the United States covered with silver dollars. 10 miles high. You got that?
Yes.
Okay. Then we're going to take one silver dollar. You take a marker and put a red X on it. One silver dollar. Put a red X on that, and I'm going to pick a volunteer. Not right now, but theoretically, we pick a volunteer, and we're going to blindfold him. And we're going to take that red marked silver dollar, and we're going to drop that somewhere in the United States. And then we're going to take a big stick, and we're going to stir it all up. 10 miles deep, we're going to stir it up real good and random. And we're going to take that guy with the blindfold, and his job is to drop somewhere out there and look around, and he's going to reach down and pick up that one silver dollar with the red mark on it. What do you think the odds are of that? Well, the odds of that happening, getting it right on the first try, is 1 in 10 to the 25th power. So for life to evolve randomly, all by itself, on Earth, is like repeating that same experiment that I just described to you 6 times in a row and getting it right the first time. A virtual impossibility. I don't even say virtual. It's just an impossibility. Don't believe that life is an accident. Don't believe that you are an accident. You're not. You were designed. You were built by the hand of God. And also, don't believe anything I said here tonight just because you think I'm really cool. Or just because you think my beard makes me look smart. Or I've thrown some fancy numbers at it. Don't believe anything I've told you without checking it out for yourself. Investigate it. I want you to do that. I put up here now, I have a blog. I have lots of articles about these kinds of things. Little random, short, little articles, easy to read. A lot of those have come from some other sites that I've done some research on, like Answers in Genesis and the Institute for Creation Research. So you can write those down, take a picture with your phone or something. They have a wealth of information, far beyond what I've gone into here. I haven't even grazed the surface. I've just nipped the edge of it. If you don't agree with anything I've said tonight, if I've ruffled some feathers, if you don't like what I said, if you disagree with me, then that's fine. Totally fine. Do your own research. Crunch the numbers yourself. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Find out for yourself. Examine the evidence for yourself. There is evidence out there. I want you guys to know that you can trust the Bible. You can believe what God has written down. So I hope that I maybe just at the very least pique your interest about this subject. The evidence is out there. It's available. I can't speak for anybody else, but I know that when I was seeking, I wasn't raised in the church. When I was seeking for the truth, I did my own research. I was skeptical for a long, long time, and I was a harsh critic. But the evidence to me became overwhelming to the point that I simply could not believe it. My research led me to accept the Bible and submit my life to Christ. Yeah. Now, you may not need that evidence, but if you do, you can find it, and it will only strengthen your faith. So question the sources, question everything, do your own research. And we're going to sing another song, and then we're going to be going up to eat a meal. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you've enjoyed the fellowship we had tonight. I thank you for your attention. And if anybody has any questions for me, shoot me an email, find me on Facebook. I'll be happy to answer any questions or turn around to some other resources. I'd be glad to. But turn it over to our song leader. Thank you guys for your attention.
$7:37. Thank you, Lord, for the